Well, I found out that the picture that Pusha T used um, as the cover art for the diss track, the story of Adidon, or Adidon, I think. I don't know. Um, First, let me say the name Adidon. I wondered if that was like a play on words where he was trying to make a reference to the fact that Drake at times borrows a style and makes it his own. He sort of adds on to a style. If you could just listen to Popcorn from Jamaica, when Drake singing with Popcorn, he's singing with some of Popcorn's inflections. When Drake singing with Lil Wayne, he's singing with some of Lil Wayne's inflections. So I just wanted to point that out. I don't know if that's where Pusha T was going with the name Adidon, right? But the subject of what I wanted to discuss is Drake using blackface, and I also want to discuss the multiracial identity and its interaction with those who identify specifically as being of African descent, or those who identify specifically of being of a more Caucasoid descent or European descent, right? Okay, now, I found out that Pusha T used an actual photo of Drake. At some point in Drake's past, he had some skeletons in the closet where he was participating in the degradation of African people by using blackface in whatever form it was, whether it was for monetary gain, whether it was just for kicks and laughs, whatever the point is. You use blackface, and it was not for any redeeming benefits for African people. Let's be honest. Nobody heard about this. Pusha T dig deep to find that, but nobody heard about this. He didn't use his stardom to perpetuate the message of African consciousness or to speak against the brutality that was being beset on Africans. He didn't do any of this. So for him to come and use Pan-African ideals as his explanation for, well, not Pan-African ideals, but he used a critique of socio-economic conditions of African people in America. He used that as the backdrop for the blackface usage, and I just found it to be very bogus, very patronizing, very disrespectful for him to think that we would even believe that Drake, who has never even mentioned any of the atrocities that have taken place in America and in Africa against Africans, for Drake, who never spoke against any of these things, would want me to believe that in his adolescence he had the revolutionary zeal of Kwame Nkrumah. This is what Drake turns around and uses as his explanation. It's very patronizing, It's very patronizing, and I found that this speaks to the multiracial, African-centered divide. There's a divide between the multiracial identifiers and those who identify as specifically African in origin, or being composed of African genetics then. But I found that Drake is using the same patronizing tactic, to explain away a very disrespectful gesture by using blackface, in an apparently degrading way, never even revealing what the context of this blackface was, how it was utilized, never showing any clips from the actual campaign to justify what he's saying. He's making reference to some Sudanese friend that he has, a friend from Sudan, that magically appeared in his life to explain away some of his misdeeds, But I wanted to discuss how this really reflects this divide between Africans and the multiracial identifiers. Firstly, clearly a lot of these people who are of multiracial genetic makeup, clearly these people at some points pivot between loyalties, or they pivot between various personas that can help them to be more easily accepted, and we don't want to think of our brothers of a multiracial background. We don't want to think of them as being less than us. We don't want to think of them as being any different from us. But it's a little unsettling to hear people with a mixed genetic background use the N-word. It's difficult to hear them speak against the conditions of black communities, because a lot of times we don't really feel like this person has actually experienced the socioeconomic conditions from our vantage point. A lot of times the perception is that these people enjoy a life of privilege that is basically denied to the average African person. You want to look at them as your brother, you want to look at them as your sister, but when you look at them, you're looking into some blue eyes. When you look at them, you're looking into some green eyes. When you look at them, they have some slanted oriental eyes, or they might have the long straight hair of a European person, but some African genetics which can be visible in other traits, other characteristics. But I don't want to consider us to be any less African if you're mixed with another race. But at the end of the day, this creates a dilemma in the mind of the mixed race individual, and many, like Bob Marley, ultimately made a definitive statement and decided that he would let the world know his loyalty and his allegiance was to his African roots, his African identity, which he saw as being more substantial and more relevant to him and his condition. And so many people don't do that, and we find a person like Drake. Drake is of a mixed heritage, right? But for him to use blackface, it seems out of order to me, because most of his features are predominantly of the European descent. So for me, it's almost just like a European putting on blackface. I don't care if you could spit a hot 16, right? The reality is, brother, the appearance alone should be something. If you have any consciousness, you wouldn't even want to be portrayed in that type of context and in that type of imagery if you recognize that the Africans in your lineage, in your genetics, they actually went through an intense oppression, and this blackface was used to dehumanize them. So it should never even feel comfortable for you to even use this type of representation, And so these are the people who we give a pass to every day. I'm not saying that Drake is any more African, any less African than me, or any more African than me, but I'm just saying, when Drake uses blackface and 6ix9ine says nigga this and nigga that, the lines are being blurred, and suddenly this hip-hop expression that was from African people has now become something that can also confuse African people, because when the guys at center stage, the guys in the spotlight, when they can speak about racial issues with the kind of reckless abandon that Trump does, then we see that the culture is being harmed, But Drake needs to apologize to African people, not just for letting Quentin Miller write his rhymes, allegedly, but he needs to apologize to African people for this skeleton that was recently dug up out of his closet by Pusha T. But if you can dig it, if you can feel what I'm saying, Drop me a comment, like, subscribe. One love. That's it.